We are Makilala TV, the first Filipino-American TV talk show in the New York metro area. Get to know us as we talk to the community leaders, innovators, advocates, and emerging artists who affect Filipino-American life.
Hello, my name is Cristina Pastor. Welcome to Makilala TV. I have a friend who married a guy for green card. I asked her, how much did you pay? She said, let's just say that he was able to buy a brand new car. Then she told me the living arrangement. They rented an apartment, split the cost, and had to schedule when they could have dates over for the night. Remember, it's not a real marriage, and they were dating separately. Marriage for green card has always fascinated me from the time I heard this story many years ago. It's because some people believe it is an easy way to get naturalized. The challenge is proving that the marriage is real with pictures, emails, and documentation to show the couple has known each other for years. ICE, or the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is very clear. Marriage fraud is a federal offense. It carries a prison term of up to 5 years, a fine of up to $250,000 for either party. And yet some foreigners are willing to take the risks. On behalf of my co-hosts, Jen Fuhrer and Rachelle Ocampo, I would like to welcome to Makilala two very prominent immigration lawyers in our community, Attorney Nick Caraquel of IDream America and Attorney Cristina Godinez. They will walk us through this very intriguing process some believe could be a pathway to citizenship. Welcome, Nick and Chris. Welcome to Makilala.
How are you?
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having us.
Oh, thanks so much for accepting our invitation to be on the show. Nick, let's start with you. How common is marriage for green cards?
So even before I become a lawyer, I think the concept of actually getting married for the green card is very common. I remember when I arrived in the US in 2007, and during my first 3 weeks, I was actually offered the idea that they actually know somebody who would be willing to enter into that arrangement, provided that, of course, the assumption that you have to pay something. And
Yes.
I actually told them that, hey, no, number one, I am not going to marry for the wrong reasons, right? So you get married because you love the person, but not getting the green card. At that time, I was not so convinced
you
yet.
mean you were being propositioned?
Yeah,
Wow.
I was in Seattle at that time.
So you're single, Attorney Nick,
Yes,
to date?
yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Anyway, my question
It's
for
really
Chris.
common. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
So, but very common siya, Ma'am Cristina, and even nowadays, right? So people would still call us and write us in the upfront once we actually feel we have the due diligence of actually knowing that this is a legitimate marriage. We stop the conversation because we don't want to be part of that conversation.
That conversation. And Chris, my question for you is, I've heard some success with fake marriages. How do you explain that?
Success with fake marriages.
Yeah. How
Okay.
do people get green cards? Marrying fraudulently.
There are people who fall through the cracks, okay? And in those situations, they are successful. And I characterize this as cracks because at some point in the future, the truth might bite you in the back eventually.
Okay.
There are like for instance, the past administration has taken efforts to look into naturalization cases and actually took steps to denaturalize persons who were involved in fraudulent practices that led them to obtain a green card, and this includes marriage fraud. So there were instances when these cases of fraudulent marriages are actually penalized by the fact that eventually you might be stripped of your citizenship. There are cases also that
Oh,
have been
really?
successful. So it's prevalent, but as far as I'm concerned, it's something that is uh, our duty as attorneys to tell the client to avoid at all costs.
That's
Because,
right.
I always tell them it's a Tina Turner song. What's love got to do with it? Everything.
That's an awesome
But
analogy.
it's very common in our community, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, because
That is
when I
really
first
common.
arrived here, I was 20 years old, and
right.
that was the first advice people told me is that magpakasal, just get married. When you're 20 and then they're trying to marry someone who's like you've never met and it's like 10 years older than you, so say you can get a green card. But then I was like, like just do it. But that's kind of scary, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Well, it's not any,
why do people always say that? I mean, Attorney Nick also said that was the first thing I was advice given to us.
well, it's not any more common in the Filipino community as it is with the immigrant community at
The
large.
immigrant community,
Yeah,
right?
it's really widespread. The thing is, there's this notion that when you get married, it's easier to get a green card. As a practitioner, I'm telling you, it's not. You go through a very strict process of scrutiny with the U.S. Immigration Service, and they are aware of these scams, which is why there are multiple steps involved. In fact, one of the steps, for instance, is that if your marriage is less than 2 years old at the time you got your green card, you have to go back and file your I-751 to remove the conditional status of your green card. So, and even if you get to apply for naturalization in less time than the usual green card holders, they will still go through the entire file. So you are under the microscope in cases where you are a green card holder based on marriage sponsorship.
Attorney Nick?
Yeah, I actually
Any
would just
comment?
like to say that again, it's not only for Filipinos; it's actually across the board. But just like what Attorney Chris actually said, there's about 700,000 cases for denaturalization now. That's actually been
700,000?
700,000, and actually the
Is
department.
that a big number?
What's that?
Is that a big number?
Of course, yes. The Department of Homeland Security created the Department of Denaturalization just to focus on the investigative portion of it. So just like what I've said, it actually comes across all fraudulent means of obtaining the green card. And for whatever reason, they obtained their citizenship. Now they are actually hunting back those people. For the Filipinos, what I've seen, again, are people involved in fraudulent fixed marriages, and also those people who actually appeared for interview at the embassy, who actually showed fake documents. So because if you remember, way back years ago, right, maybe in the 70s, 80s, where technology is not that advanced, where people could actually bring in some documents, Sinomar, when they're actually hiding some of the history of marriages, right? And because we know very well that it takes longer for married children than unmarried children to come to the United States. But now it's being hunting. I mean, they're hunting it with the technology. They were able to find out that, oh, you were married at the time that you entered when you said you were single. The same manner with fixed marriages, though. People who were previously married in the Philippines declare themselves as single to obtain a fiancé visa or spouse visa, or be able to actually get divorced here and enter into a fixed marriage. They are now being haunted with all the technology advances that we have now.
So, Chris, what if you were initially married somebody for a green card, but eventually you do actually fall in love? Is that also illegal, or did
Fall
you
in
just
love with whom, Rachel?
with the person that you
Who sponsored you?
Yes.
Well, then that's good, because the marriage is solid and legitimate. Now the question is, at what point will the marriage be scrutinized in the immigration process?
That's the one. Okay.
So
I know that there are questions that are really tough that the couple has to answer
Right.
correctly. So
Right.
how do you prepare for that? How do
I
immigration laws?
think
I
we
mean,
might
if it's a
not be
real marriage, is there any need to prepare? if
Well,
you know,
if you're faking it, you need to prepare.
well, the
right?
thing with faking is we do not recommend it. We strongly advise against it.
But what is a sample question? Because now I'm thinking like, do I know my husband? Will I pass this test?
Well,
Um,
something like where you live. Some folks are afraid to say, are so nervous that sometimes they forget the street or the apartment number. I've heard of stories
Okay,
like that. No,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean there's no bona fides or there's no good faith.
Mm.
It's just that some people are so nervous about the immigration process that they forget things that they should actually know, so, like the back of their hand. But there are questions like, when was your last vacation together, or
Okay.
where did you meet your spouse? Fairly straightforward questions, which if you are truly a couple shouldn't be a problem.
no problem. Yeah.
Do you have to show pictures or bank accounts or
Not
That's
have
right.
to.
you
You
don't have
don't really have to. It's not cut and dried. Uh, as long as you can provide documentation, any form of evidence that shows that you entered the marriage primarily to establish a true marital union in the United States, that you want to live together, because this is a family thing. You're supposed to be with your family. The US citizen has the right to be with his family, the spouse. So
Let's say
that's
you were really in love in the beginning. You got married, and then you got your green card, but then the marriage didn't work out, and you have to divorce. The one who sponsored you. Like initially you were in love, but now it's like the reverse that Rachelle said. Okay, that's not the person I really wanted to be married anymore. Will you lose your green card?
no, not readily. I mean, it really depends on what stage you are in the immigration process. If you are at that stage where you went back to immigration service for removal of condition, then there are some procedural issues to be addressed. But that doesn't mean that you will lose your green card, especially if you entered the marriage in good faith. I mean, there are situations when marriages fail. Um, I've had a situation where this makeup company executive, um, their marriage broke down after a year and a half, but the bona fides was there. It was entered into in good faith. The marriage was valid, and they actually had a child, and of course it was a bitter divorce, but immigration service was convinced that there was no fraud involved in entering into the marriage, because what really gets immigration service is, was the marriage entered into for the purpose of evading immigration law?
Okay, Attorney Nick, I know of two couples, gay couples, who the relationship is real, authentic. They're really in love, and they got married in a matter of less than a year. So it makes one wonder whether it is easier for same-sex couples to get their green card than it is for regular couples.
Not necessarily though. Whether it's a hetero relationship or the same-sex marriage, they apply the same standard. However, it really depends on a lot of factors though. That who handled the case. So let's say if you are actually assigned to New York per se, or Newark, where there's a lot of applicants, then you would expect that there's a lot of waiting time because of the number of applicants. But if you are actually residing in between Pennsylvania and upstate New York, then chances are your waiting period is less than that, because green card interviews are done at the local office. So they actually schedule interviews and all that. So the lesser the applicants are, the chances are that your waiting period will be less. So it's not a question of whether it's a hetero or a same-sex marriage relationship, but it actually a lot of more on how soon the local office could schedule the interview.
And is there like a statute of limitations? Say if someone did have fraudulent documents, they went through the green card process and they have it, and they're legitimate citizens. Is there, like, if someone now did an investigation for some reason and saw like, wow, that is a fake, document during the application, are they going to take out their green card?
I don't
Well,
think so. Either in the family base or the employment base, again, the government has the right and the obligation to actually verify some of those documents. The reason why there are now 700,000 cases undergoing denaturalization cases. They would look into that, and I haven't been aware of any timeline that forbids the government from going into the case and check. I don't know with Attorney Chris though.
The fact that there is an effort to look into records of naturalized U.S. citizens, that in itself is telling us that it's an open book. It's fair play, and you know, when a marriage-based green card holder applies for citizenship, the whole file is going. Like I said, will be reviewed thoroughly by the officer. So. It's fraud is something that allows gives the government reason to examine for as long as it's they have a basis for looking into it.
So I know someone who wants to marry his sister-in-law who is recently widowed. So they will be able to trace family connections, right? I mean, surnames and relations. That's not going to happen, right?
Well, the forms actually list down prior marriages, so it depends on how what the immigration history of the parties would be. These things will be looked into by immigration service. Marriage to a sister-in-law is not an unusual thing. It's been there since time immemorial.
Oh, okay.
Even the ancient Chinese people in Bhutan, there are practices, wherein sister-in-law is wed to the brother of a deceased because of cultural considerations. So
Yeah.
it's not unusual
But
here in the
but that's
US.
not for green card purposes, right?
For as long as it's not for green card purposes. I think what the immigration law prohibits are in situ marriages, but marrying a sister or brother-in-law is not prohibited for as long as they can actually prove good faith marriage. So again, incestuous marriages, I mean, you cannot marry your child or your parent
Yeah,
or
yeah, that's right.
like that. But brothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, they can.
Is it really hard to get a green card? I mean, you have people coming over, crossing the border, overstaying, and then some people say, why not just apply? I mean, what are ways can we apply to get a green card? Is it
It- it's
easy?
it's not just a simple process of getting married and then going to apply. There are a lot of factors that go into getting a green card. Not only because you are sponsored by somebody who can sponsor you, they also look at your personal background. For instance, if you have criminal history, if there was fraud in obtaining a visa, the fact that you crossed the border, those are things that immigration will look into and might create obstacles in the entire process.
So what's the right way to get a green card?
By law.
Let's say you're a Filipino. Let's say you're a Filipino and you're in the Philippines and you really want to come to the US. What are your options?
Can I answer that? So my practice is actually largely into the family and employment law, and I've been asked a lot of those questions almost every day. I always answer because there's a lot of ways of getting a green card. But
Yeah.
for this question and for the Filipinos, the common way of getting a green card is the family based. Either you find a fiance, a spouse, or your parents petitioning you, or your sibling petitioning you, or you actually get into employment. But I would just talk about the most common ones, right? The family based, either you find a spouse visa or a fiancé visa, then apply for a green card later, or an employment based. So to answer the question, how hard it is, it's actually answering the question of how hard is it to convince or to find a spouse that will file a petition for you or a fiancé to file a petition for you with the assumption that it is a legitimate relationship. On the employment side, how hard is it for you to find an employer who will file a petition for you? So if they could answer that question, then I think the process are put in place that would make it a lot easier for them to comply. The other instance that you actually said that, hey, for people crossing the border is a lot more complicated. For, let's say, for Filipinos who are happen to be in Mexico and cross the border, and they found somebody that they fell in love with, and they find agree, they get married.
Mhm.
It's not as straightforward for people who actually enter the U.S. legally speaking, because for those people who cross, then there is another step that they have to comply. There is what we call the unlawful presence waiver. They have to file the spouse visa first, then apply for the unlawful presence waiver because again, they are not legally inspected in the United States, and they have to go out of the U.S. to apply for their interview at the U.S. Embassy. So that actually makes the process a little bit longer because in that, minimum 2 years for people who actually enter the U.S. illegally. But for people who actually are in the United States and it was inspected coming in and they fall in love with a person, file for a spouse visa and a green card, it's a lot easier. It's just like anybody who are legally in the U.S. and get married and apply for a green card. The same people who entered legally in the U.S. and apply for employment, just like some of our nurses who come to the U.S. Become a student visa and then happen to find an opportunity that an employer will want to file a green card for them. So I think that's how I actually see that or answer that question of how hard Filipinos to find or to apply for a green card.
Is it easier to apply? Is it more advisable to apply for a visa outside of the Philippines, outside of the US than within the US?
It depends on a number of
Circumstantially.
factors.
Okay.
Right, it depends on a number of factors. So let's say my clients actually ask them which one is better though, the fiancé or the spouse visa? Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of factors that you are going to consider. I ask them, what's your goal? Is your if your objective is to bring your loved one faster, then file the fiancé visa. But if you would want your loved one to come to the U.S. and be able to work, so you can who or he or can she can help you, then file for the spouse visa then because those people who come to the United States on a spouse visa would be able to work immediately as soon as they have their green cards and their social security number, as opposed to those people who actually come on a fiancé visa. They have to get married in 90 days, file for the green card, and wait for at least 5 months from green card application to get the work permit. So, to answer that question, I throw back again the question to the client to say, what's your goal? Right? Because most of our clients do, our primary consideration is the cost. It's a lot costly to complete that process to the green card if you enter on a fiancé visa. Because again, you have to file for the fiancé visa, get married, apply for the green card. It's a lot costly than getting married through a spouse. So you get married outside the US, apply for the spouse visa, then you come here, you wait for your social security number and be able to work.
Uh-huh.
And
Okay.
what is this term that I've heard is mail order bride? Is that something along the lines of like what we're talking about now?
Yeah, the mail order bride used to be the fiancé visa type of, right?
Mm.
So they meet people outside through the internet and all that. They actually maybe pen pals before.
Mhm.
Then they come to the United States, then they get married, right? And
Mhm.
that's how they actually found or gave them the opportunity to apply for the green card.
And
Attorney
that
Chris?
can be fraudulent as well, right, Attorney Nick?
Oh no, not necessarily though. Again, it boils down to is it a legitimate marriage, a legitimate relationship. If they find out that yeah, through that conversation, through the mail order, they found true love, they get married and apply for a green card, then it should be a proper way of getting their green card. So what's prohibited before the mail order bride era before and nowadays, it's the same question. When you apply for a green card, is it for the bona fide relationship? Attorney Chris, you want to add on that?
No, you covered it. Except that I would probably add that mail order brides, by its term, it's actually scrutinized a little deeper by the authorities because of the possibility of uh, the lack of the bona fides or the fraudulent nature. This has been used widely in situations of trafficking.
Mhm.
In my experience, there are women who are enticed to come to the United States because they believe they will find love and marriage and live happily ever after here. And turns out they were actually victims of human trafficking. So those are considerations that will go into the decision-making process of the Immigration Service and the State Department.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other conversation of human trafficking.
Oh, yeah.
It's really triggers that whole situation.
Right. And if I may add also, the USCIS actually had established or adopted the IMBRA Act. This is the International Marriage Broker Regulation Act. So when you apply for a fiancé visa nowadays or a spouse visa, and they actually would ask you, how did you meet your partner? And if they find out that you actually met them online, then there is actually an extra requirement for you to submit. Again, they would want to know whether it's a fixed marriage or, again, just to avoid the mail order bride scenarios. And even nowadays, sad to say, there are a lot of cases where people who met online come to the United States and become victims of domestic violence.
Yeah.
They actually happen to be living in very remote areas in the United States, and they become, the husband's friends put them on a very bad situation. So, but there is that extra step. Once the relationship was entered into through the social media, internet, there is additional requirement for that.
Right.
Do you want to
Right.
talk about that, Chris?
So
Christina, go ahead.
having met on an internet site is a red flag by itself, right?
No, not necessarily. It should
I
not
think
be.
I think we're actually out of time, Christina, but I think
that's right.
yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Rachelle, for reminding me. Thank you. Oh, I hate to cut this very interesting conversation. Thank you, Nick and Chris, for your very interesting insights on marriage fraud. It's fraught with a lot of risks, and people need to know what they're getting into. And no, you cannot marry a relative, even if you have different names. And if you need to get married, remember to marry because you are in love. And on that corny note, I'd like to thank our viewers for tuning in to Makilala. And please keep watching. Thank you so much.
Maraming salamat.
Thank you.